Again, welcome to the Beginner Gardener Intensive. We will be here all week with new workshops on gardening, and we're really excited that you could join us. My name is Kristen Fields, and leading our workshop today, we've got Laura Casarigola. We also have Chantel Kemp here with us today, and Kate Winfett.
So cool, we have a lot of beginner gardeners, which is good because this is the Beginner Gardener Intensive. But for any of those intermediate or advanced gardeners, if you have more detailed or in-depth questions, feel free to throw them in the Q&A and we'll try to get to those ones as well. All right. So these are some considerations that you want to look at before you start right into growing your garden. You want to know, are you working with an indoor space or an outdoor space? Because obviously that's going to give you a lot of like what types of things you can grow in there. You want to know what your garden goals are before too. So what are your expectations for your garden? Are you hoping to have some like kitchen herbs to throw into your cooking every now and then? Do you want to be growing a ton of like fruits and vegetables for yourself, your family, and have a bunch of zucchinis to try to pan off on all your neighbors as well? Or do you want to put some plants in your apartment that help purify the air? So there's a lot of different things you can get out of your garden. So it's good to think about like what you want and what you expect to get out of it. You also want to think about what level of upkeep do you want to commit to it. So this is if you want to do low maintenance, maybe you're really busy and you're out of the house a lot. So you want some low maintenance plants that don't require too much upkeep. Or maybe you're stuck at home these days and you really need a hobby and something to invest a ton of time in which case you could do high maintenance. But there's something along that whole spectrum to fit what you are able and willing to do. The next considerations are more of like the physical garden aspects. So you want to make sure that you do have water access. A lot of things we see in the city right now are rooftop gardens. And so if you're doing something on a rooftop, you want to make sure you can actually get a hose up there so that you don't end up carrying gallons and gallons of water up 10 flights of stairs. So you want to keep track of that kind of thing as well. Or if you're going to be away for weeks at a time, you might want something that doesn't require daily watering. You also want to think about light. And so there's different ways to harness natural light. And so I'm going to go over some strategies for how to best take advantage of the light you do have in your spaces. And we'll also go over if you want to add supplemental lights such as grow lights. And then you also want to, before you get started, figure out what is the size of your space. Measuring is always a really good step. If you're doing a windowsill garden and you only have room for maybe 5 pots of plants, you want to make sure that you're getting in your 5 favorite plants in there. So it's always good to measure and keep that in mind. Some steps to go through before you start throwing seeds in the places that you want to grow things. You want to decide on your space and then draw a map. And this is something that I actually find to be a really fun and creative part of the process. It's also fun for like any kids in your groups to do because they get to draw or color, really get that creative side out. And it also helps you work through all of the different things you're going to need on that map, which I'm going to go through in the next slide. It's always good as well to keep your timeline in mind. For example, here in New York and in the Northeast, a lot of our outdoor growing is happening between the frost dates, between the spring and the fall. But even if you're growing indoors and your apartment is the same temperature year round, a lot of plants are still very sensitive to the sun patterns and they can tell when it's winter because they're not getting that strong heat from the sun. So things like basil, which are annual plants and don't really like the winter, they're going to notice when it's winter. So if you want to have basil, you want to make sure you're growing that even indoors during the hot summer months. Then you also want to make a list of materials. And this is good so that you don't start a project and then realize halfway through you're going to need a whole bunch of other materials that you weren't expecting. So it's good to just have a list beforehand of, are you building a bed and how much soil are you going to need to fill it with? Are you going to Or are you gonna completely upcycle and repurpose materials and like source it for free from other places? So keeping a list of what you're gonna need will help you keep track of your project. And going through these steps are just like to help set yourself up for success. These are some examples of garden maps. And so it might be surprising that we recommend garden maps even for an indoor garden, but this is an example of a kitchen windowsill herb garden. And some of the considerations that we put on this map is, what are the dimensions? So we've got the length, the width, how many things can we fit in this one windowsill? What is the direction that the sun is coming in? And so here in the Northern Hemisphere, it's always good to have a south or southeast facing window because that'll get you the most sun. But in addition to just the cardinal directions, you're also going to want to observe, how does the sun move through the space? Are there buildings blocking one window but maybe not another one? What are all the trees surrounding you? So that's an example of an indoor garden. Down here we have a school garden in New York City, and this is an outdoor garden with quite a lot of raised beds. And some things to point out in this one are they measured the space again. We've got cardinal directions again. They put where their entrance is. They have what they're planting in each bed and how much space are they going to have between these beds too. That's always good to consider if you're trying to fit more groups into a space. This one over here is one that our coworker Chantel made on a free phone app called Home Outside. And this one is really great. Some things to point out about it are you can put in the immovable objects. So you're gonna wanna plant around and build around these trees. And so you can see that the garden beds are in the most open spaces where there aren't any things to shade it. Over in these shadier areas though is where we put seating, tables, and a shade structure, which is good for groups. It's good for classes so they're not out in the sun all day. And then what's also really great about this design is that we could put in the pathways and make sure that we're just keeping in mind accessibility in the garden as well. Pathways like this can really help to make sure that the space is open and that everyone can move through it. All right, I'm gonna go into ways to best harness the natural light for an indoor garden. After I go through some indoor garden design strategies, I'll move on to outdoor gardening for the second half. But for now, let's look at this windowsill garden here. So what we have is, this is my windowsill, and I don't know if you can tell, but it's one of the windows that bumps out like a trapezoid, so it can actually get sun from a lot of different angles. So this is my prime real estate, so I put the plants that need the sun the most on this windowsill. This is a cilantro seed start, and before it sprouted, when I was germinating the seed, I put it in this plastic clamshell to further take advantage of that sunlight, because when the sun goes in, it warms it up, and then it gets trapped, all that heat, and even the moisture gets trapped inside to help the seeds germinate faster. We have a whole activity on how to build different versions of tiny greenhouses. This over here is a lemon plant that I used a seed from a grocery store lemon. It's one of my quarantine experiments, and I knew it's a tropical plant, so it would need as much light as possible. This is a basil plant, which does require full sun, and I put this one over here because I know the sun is traveling this way, and I didn't want the tall plant to create shade for the shorter plants. So that's another way just to make sure that your plants are getting as much sun as they can and that you're harnessing the type of light you are getting. If you don't have a sunny window, or if you're trying to take advantage of other places that don't get direct light, I'm gonna go through, I have a list of plants that do well in that indirect or partial light scenarios. But this here is a golden pothos plant. It's inside a bookshelf. It's not ever getting hit by direct rays of sunlight. And it's been sitting in this glass of water for months. All I have to do is change out the water every couple of weeks to give it a little more oxygen. But other than that, it's kind of just hanging out. It's very low maintenance and good to go. So those are two different types of gardening styles. If you are looking to use a grow light, there's also a lot of different options. I'm not going to go too into depth for these. It will require a bit more research if you're looking to buy something. But what we have are grow lights have different like uses, and some are more powerful than other ones. So this is a really powerful fluorescent grow light that we use in our Grow NYC office to start the seeds for our urban garden, the Governor's Island Teaching Garden. And they're kind of old-fashioned because they are fluorescent, which means they take up more energy. We should probably upgrade to the LED ones at some point. But these ones are really powerful, and these are, you can grow them in a dark closet. All they need is light from these. Over here, I have, oh, and this costs about a couple $100s. Over here, this is like a $30 or $40 grow light that I was experimenting with. And I found, I don't know if you can tell, if you've had some gardening experience, you might be able to tell these are not super healthy seedlings. You can even just tell from comparing. And Kristen's gonna go over this more tomorrow for the seed starting workshop. But you can see they're very stringy, and that's because they're trying to get to the light. You can almost hear them saying like, there's not enough light, please help us. So this one, I found out for the cheap grow lights, you're gonna have to put them by a window so that they're getting natural light as well as this supplemental light. There are LED grow lights that look just like this that are more expensive. They're gonna be around $200, $300, and they're super powerful and they act more like these ones. So it's kind of just what you want to invest in. This is just one more option we see a lot in school STEM labs around New York City, hydroponic grow tower, and that one allows you to grow big leafy greens. So these are some examples of things you can grow based on different light that you have access to. So you can read through them. I will post them in the follow-up post, so you don't have to memorize all of these right now. But as you can see, you can do herbs, microgreens and sprouts, vegetables, especially the dwarf varieties or the bush varieties. Like you might see tiny chili peppers growing in a sunny windowsill. I've seen dwarf lemon trees or kumquat trees, even here in New York City, growing in a sunny window. And your desert plants such as succulents or cacti will also like that sun. For indirect low light, you can do mint, and all of these, snake plant, spider plant, pothos, and air plants, they're extremely low maintenance, and they are air purifiers as well. And then for grow lights, this is all dependent on how powerful your grow light is. You can do seed starts, herbs, microgreens, leafy greens. All right, I think I am gotta pick it up so that we have time for the Q&A. But I'm just gonna go through the rest of the pictures, which will at least give you an idea and hopefully spark some ideas for your space. Make sure you have good drainage, and we are also gonna post all these resources and information on the post coming up. We've got outdoor garden beds. We put landscape fabric and fill them in with clean soil. That's just something we do for urban gardens because we're not sure about soil contaminants. There's non-edible gardens for pollinators, which are good for your local and global ecosystem. We've got raised beds. There are containers, which you can just get these for free or just for a few dollars, and they have plenty of depth for things like tomato, eggplants, peppers. And vertical gardening is also a great space saver, especially if you're in an urban setting. Even on chain link fences, you can hook up and have hanging gardens like this. And I've seen people just get burlap sacks for free from their local coffee shops and just grow on a fence like that. And this is just a reminder as you're going through designing it, at every step of the way, just make sure that you're being as accessible as possible so the most people as possible can be in your space. All right, I think it is now time for Q&A.
Okay, so we have so many good questions, and I just want to start by saying that if we don't have time to answer your question today, we are going to answer all of the questions in that follow-up post on the distance learning page, and we are going to email you the link to that post, the recording of this session, all of the Q&As, and any resources that we've like referenced during. So if we will do as many as we can. So let's go with our first question is, what best option do you suggest to cover the ground from weeds?
I would say mulch or wood chips is always a good way to go. We often put the mulch around outside of garden beds, which will really help suppress the weeds. You could also do landscape fabric. If you're building beds, that is another weed suppressant.
Okay. Our next question is, are all plants okay with direct sunlight? At least how many hours of direct sunlight do they need?
I would say a lot of plants, the majority of plants that we grow for gardening, they do like the full sun. There are some that do better in like shade or partial shade. I mean, if you're trying to grow mushrooms, those ones need to be in the shade, and different things like that. So it's always worth just checking the back of your packet or reading the directions on your seed tag to see what your plant needs. Full sun, full direct sun, that means 6 to 8 hours of direct sun a day. Partial shade is 3 to 6 hours, and full shade is no direct light. So you could just have 0 to 3 hours of sunlight.
Okay. Somebody has a question about growing zones. Can you describe and explain what it is and how does it impact different plants, herbs, flowers, etc.?
Yeah, the growing zones, a lot of it is just based on your climate. And so all around the world, you can kind of like Google and see what your climate zone is. And so that'll tell you what you can plant in which seasons. Like for New York City, based on our climate zone, I think it's 7A or 7B, we get directions of like, you can plant this plant after the frost date, so sometime in May or June. So those growing zones will just give you an idea for mostly like weather and climate conditions.
We have a follow-up question about sunny windows and if there is a way to measure the intensity of sunlight that's coming into your window.
That's a good question. You could always put like a thermometer, I guess, in that window and see what it heats up to. Something you could do too is to test which of your windows gets the most sun, cut up a sponge and soak it, and then put the different pieces of the sponge at your different windows and see which one dries out the fastest. There's different ways to experiment with it. And you can also just try to listen to your plants too. You saw that picture of my seedlings like begging for more light. So identifying how plants act when they get, not enough light or too much light, those will give you signals for how to adjust.
Okay. And we have a question about a porch that is very sunny, but it still gets really cold. So how do you insulate plants?
Insulating plants. That is something that wood chips can also help with. Not all plants will react well because the wood chips add some, I forget if it's acidity or something into the beds, but you can always cover them with wood chips. You could also get row cover, which is like, it looks like a fleecy little cover, like a blanket that you put over them to keep them warm. You could create a cold tunnel, or you could just cover it in plastic sheeting overnight. You can make little stakes and put the sheeting on top of it, so that will help insulate the plants too.
Okay. We have a question about what plants we recommend for ground cover. And particularly, they want to know if we recommend using crimson clover as a winter cover crop for raised beds.
The crimson clover, I am not sure. If anyone else on the Grow NYC team knows about those, Chantel? I know some other covers are like a lot of different types of peas and different grains and soybeans and things like that. Wheat, rye works as a good one, straw. What do you think, Chantel?
I think crimson is really great, but I think for any cover crop, it's important to mix it, just so that when you're coming back, you're not really having to deal with just pulling out all crimson or pulling out all winter rye or pulling out all peas. They can they can be kind of tricky when you come back in the spring. So just being mindful that a mix of cover crops is going to help with biodiversity and really give you all of the nutrients, everything that you're looking for when you're putting it down anyway.
Okay, and now we have two questions that are kind of related. So one person is asking if we can go back to the slide that showed the leggy seedlings, and somebody else is asking if their plants look like that, can you save them?
Yes, you can. So when I saw that this was happening, I gave it like a week, and then I was like, this is not working. So and by this point, it was, it's late May in New York City, so I could leave them outside actually at this point. So I just took them out to get some sun. It depends on how resilient the plant is. So like the cilantro that I had going in here, that sprung right back, but the thyme it's still alive, but it's not quite as quick growing, so it's taking a little longer. It's kind of just a mix. It depends on your plants, but it's possible.
Okay, and we have time for just one more question. How do you kill weeds? Do you need to pull them out by the roots or any other techniques?
Pulling them out by the roots is the way to do it. And then making sure that you're taking those weeds and not leaving them in your garden space. You want to take them out. You don't want to put them in your compost either, generally, because then they'll just regrow in your compost. But take them and try to find a different place for them, or leave them out in the sun to dry out and like fully die. There's also, you might want to look into some other weeds that are actually edible weeds, so you don't have to throw them all away. If they're growing in clean soil, maybe you want to look into edible weeds. Personally, I don't recommend herbicides or pesticides because they will contaminate the rest of your stuff and the whole ecosystem.
Okay. Well, so we are out of time for today. There are so many questions, and we promise we are going to answer all of them in the distance learning page. We are going to email them to you. You will have them by tonight, so you will get all the answers to your questions then. I just want to take a second to thank everybody for coming, to let you know this is day one, but we have workshops this whole week. We have seed starting tomorrow with me, home gardening with Kate on Wednesday, natural pest management with Chantel on Thursday, and we have a Q&A session with our teaching garden experts on Friday. So if you have really super tricky questions, we want to stump them. We'll be sending you our contact information as well. And the last thing that I will say is that if you enjoyed today's presentation and you wanted to give a donation, large or small, whatever it is, you can go to grownyc.org. So thank you so much, and we hope you'll be tuning in tomorrow for day 2 of the virtual beginner gardening workshop. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.